name is Aram C.Y. Collier, and I'm the head of programming at the Toronto Real Asian International Film Festival. Welcome to our post-screening discussion of the film Who Killed Vincent Chin. I'd like to thank Osler, Hoskin, and Harcourt LLP once again for their support of this important event. Before we begin, we'd like to acknowledge that the contents of this presentation may have been triggering to some viewers. If you're feeling emotionally activated, we are offering the confidential services of an active listener who can provide one-on-one peer support. They are available at select times. For more information, please visit realasian.com/active listener. And now I'd like to introduce our moderator for this discussion, Yung Chang. Yung is the multi-award winning director of several feature documentaries, most recently Wuhan, Wuhan. Yung is also on Real Asian's board of directors. Welcome, Yung.
Thank you, Aram. Thank you, everyone, for attending this discussion and for watching this most unique and important film, one that has been so influential, certainly in my career as a filmmaker. I want to firstly dive in and introduce our special guests. Firstly, the co-director of Who Killed Vincent Chin, Renee Tajima-Peña, an Academy Award-nominated filmmaker and professor of Asian American Studies at UCLA. She is the series producer of the groundbreaking PBS docuseries Asian Americans. She recently co-produced the May 19th AAPI Solidarity social media campaign that just launched. Welcome, Renee.
Hi.
And hi. And another special guest, we have Annie Tan. She is a New York City public school special education teacher, activist, writer, and storyteller, born and raised in Chinatown, New York City. Annie fights for her students, public education, teachers' unions, tenants' rights, and Asian Americans, organizing a better world. Annie told her family's story, which you can listen to through The Moth. Annie is now working on her first book, a memoir. Hi, Annie.
Hi, Yung.
Thank you for joining us. It's a great honor to have the two of you here to talk through Who Killed Vincent Chin. I think, firstly, the film is from 87, 88, and has endured across generations. It's an activist film, a true crime story, a legal drama, artfully crafted film, but most importantly, it's an emotional and intensely human film that still resonates, for better and worse, for the Asian community, and certainly in personal ways for you, Annie. I think just to get the ball rolling, Renee, I'd like to hear a little bit about a little behind the scenes context for the making of Who Killed Vincent Chin. At what point in the timeline did you start making the film, firstly? And then, yeah, let's start there.
Okay, well, Vincent was killed in June of 82, but nobody really knew about what happened until about early 83. And that's because Ron Ebens and Mike Nitz, who were his killers, pled guilty. I forget what the word is. I think it's pleaded guilty to manslaughter. And Judge Kaufman gave them a $3,700 and some change, a fine, and 3 years probation. As some people said, it's like paying off a car, $3,700 to get 3 years to pay it off. And so then the local community in Detroit, first the Chinese community and then the Asian American community, started meeting. They started sending out notices to the broader Asian American community around the country. And at that time, I was working at Third World Newsreel, a film collective. And I got this letter. In those days, there's no internet, nothing like that. So people would mail things in a mailbox. And Jack Chen, who was a historian in New York, had sent around these copies of clippings from Detroit. And it told the story about this Chinese American guy just about to be married who was brutally murdered, and his killers were just about to actually go free with no jail time. And people were outraged. And so we thought, let's make a 15-minute video, like a video for organizing video. And that's where it started.
So then as a 15-minute video, how then did you realize that you had something bigger to tell, and that, structurally a longer film out of this 15 minutes that was the original vision?
Well, I don't remember how it got bigger, but we did some shoots in San Francisco when Lily Chin was going around the country doing rallies. And then Nancy Tong, who's another filmmaker, who's actually from Toronto. Nancy Tong, who is the associate producer of the film and did all of the interviews with Lily Chin, she and I went to Detroit for actually 3 months to do research. And as we were there in Detroit, it just became really clear that where we thought this was just this, open and shut case, it was very, we had this black and white kind of perception of what happened. And we just realized there was just a lot of gray area, a lot of layers. And so it just became much bigger and much more interesting. And clearly it was going to be not, a short video. It would be a feature film.
Yeah. And I mean, when you went to Detroit for 3 months of research, did you, the skills that you brought to that research phase came from a journalistic background, I'm assuming, or how were you thinking through the stages and piecing the plot together? Because, the story and I mean, structurally, the film is, for lack of a better word, it's quite riveting in the way it takes you in emotionally. And in that way that I think is quite groundbreaking in itself, how you piece together this sort of legal drama and crime story felt like, it's the stuff that even, I think it just predates the kind of the crime dramas that are popular now, and I think you really kind of laid a look and feel for the film. Can you talk a little bit more about that process of doc making?
So I grew up on television, and well, two things. One is I was really influenced in all of my films. I kind of looked to, even though they're documentary films, I looked to literary or fiction influences. So like in My America or Honk, If You Love Buddha, which was a road movie, it was like all Jack Kerouac, really like influenced by Jack Kerouac, like even the kind of the route I took. And so for the way I looked at the Chin case, and having, read the transcripts of the legal proceedings, is, as a Rashomon kind of approach. But the other thing is because I grew up like a typical American kid watching so much television. At that time, there was a pretty seminal detective show called Hill Street Blues. And Hill Street Blues, unlike other shows before that, had this, also these multiple kinds of perspectives where they had these different story threads that would weave in and out. And so for me, that was a real great kind of structural model for how to, take, you've got like the story of Vincent Chin and his family, his friends, and then you've got like Ron Ebens and Mike Nitz, the killers, and like their world. And it became a parallel development. So I even have like all my old sketches with these schematics of how this parallel structure would develop. And it was pretty much close to what happened in the final structure of the film. But so it was really, just one thing, and this is for like film historians. At that time in the 80s, there was actually this huge argument between film versus video. So you couldn't get into a lot of film festivals if a certain percentage of your film was originated in video. But for me also, like news clips, which was video, was, it was such a important dramatic. There was a way to like be very economical in the narrative because, just in 30 seconds or 1 minute, they get the whole story across. But it was also, I associated it with drama because like when I was growing up, when you heard that breaking news music, something was really happening, like the president was assassinated or something like that. Not today where it's like just storm watch and you hear the music. So for me, that was the dramatic turns can also rest on the news clips. Sorry for rambling.
That's not rambling at all. It's very informative, Renee, and I do want to dig into that a little more too. It's not only the way you use archive, the way you cut to it, but also how you use music and certain sequences. To me, in an ironic or slightly bitter tone, like when you go to the white picket fence American a cappella, troupe, and you go to the Detroit rock band, singing that particular song, and how you weave that throughout the narrative, and then eventually come back to it at the end, and it's to me, it leaves quite a bitterness and gets the blood boiling a little bit, to feel how disconnected that association is from in particular, Vincent Chin's, and his mother's experience. And I find it so moving, and how that works into to making this sort of investigative film have that tone that can play with the audience to make them reflect a little deeper. Seeing those to me, that's a very cinematic association. And would you anything to speak on that a little bit, perhaps?
I mean, we have to thank our executive producers at WTVS Detroit, the PBS station, Juanita Anderson and Bob Larson, because, for Asian American film, we're not trusted. PBS is a very white institution. Then it was like really white institution. So they wanted us to, in order to make the film, they gave us, and Chris Choi, who I made the film with, by then it had, a number of years of experience, but they wanted us to have this white male CBS News guy as I called him like our senior tutor. And Bob and Juanita just said, don't worry, we'll deal with him. You just make the film you want to make. Because the CBS News style was, no music, because music was emotional and it would kind of slant the journalism of the film. And for me, at least, Motown I grew up with Motown. Motown meant, and I grew up during that time of, the big five auto companies and Go America and, the prosperity before the recession crashed. And so I remembered, it's like, you listen to Motown and, all the dads had jobs. And then all of a sudden that was all gone. So for me, the music, we're still paying for the music in that, it's like Motown costs so much money. It's like the rights have expired. But, at least for that moment, it was great to have. It really said a lot, I think, about that history and that environment.
I think I want to come back to you and dig into further, just a little more about your process and how you gained access to the subjects in the film. But I'd like to jump to Annie, and it's interesting that we have you here. Firstly, Annie, because I think it would be cool to get a little of your perspective of how you came to the film, and then also I think it's useful to know that you also came upon a discovery. And so can you fill us in a little bit about your relationship to Vincent Chin and the film too?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm just honored to be here. I think this is the first time Renee and I are actually on a panel together. We've talked multiple times, but I've never actually spoken to you while seeing your face. So it's just lovely. And also just hearing everything about just you being there and filming with my great auntie, Lily Chin, who is the mother of Vincent Chin. It's just always a reminder to me that, like, my family is, walking, living, breathing human beings like throughout this whole case, and Renee, you did such a beautiful job doing that in the film. But I didn't really know my family like that when I was growing up. I just thought, as many kids of immigrants do, that we're new to this country, that we don't have a history here. And my family immigrated a few years after Vincent Chin was murdered. I found out later. So very much I'm like, okay, I'm going to survive, help my parents translate things, and be a teacher. And that was my life path, like up till I was 13. And one day I'm watching another PBS documentary called Becoming American, The Chinese Experience, which was quite apt as a Chinese American. And they showed footage from Who Killed Vincent Chin in that short video. Maybe it was the last 20 minutes of the documentary series. And I would have just totally tossed aside like the story of Vincent Chin and Lily Chin as just like, oh, these are Americans who were here already, when my mom just walked into the room and was like, "Gogo hai le piuko," that's your cousin. And all of a sudden things shifted, like in me thinking, wait, my family's been in America, but also there's this hidden history that my family's not telling, because as Renee said earlier, the guys got off. They never served a day in jail, and my family lost the case. And it was very traumatic for my family, and to the point where Lily Chin left America because she was so heartbroken by the American justice system and America in general. For me, that changed my whole conception of self, that it wasn't that I was American, it was that I belonged, and that I didn't understand why I didn't feel that feeling in the first place until I understood that my family had been here. But I did years and years of research, Renee. I could not find a single copy of the documentary because, as you know, it's not available on DVD. But one day in college, like I was in a Students of Color leadership retreat, and for one of the first times ever, I said I was related to Vincent Chin. And it just so happened that there were multiple people in the Asian American Alliance in that room who were saying, "Hey, Annie, we're actually showing the screening of the film on Tuesday." So I just so happened to watch it with another Toisan American person. Lily Chin spoke Toisan. And when I watched the film, it just came to life for me because I had never heard my great auntie's voice like that, speaking up so loudly for justice. And me and my friend just were sobbing in that little theater together, knowing that this was not just a story in history. This was our family. Even though she's not related to Lily, she understood. But I think that's what happened with the Asian American movement around Vincent Chin, that so many people felt like this could be them. And especially in this rise of anti-Asian hatred with the pandemic, and with just so many centuries of anti-Asian bias and laws and prejudice throughout, it just makes you think like you could do everything right in the world. You could go and become a teacher and just go and do your thing, and then you could still get killed for it just by the way you looked, and that's no way to lead a life. So very much thank you, Renee, for capturing the voice of my great auntie. I found out about Vincent Chin a year after Lily passed, and I wish I was able to ask her so many questions. But I know I sit here and I'm able to at least hear her voice through your film. So thank you so much for that gift.
But can I say something about the reason why I met Annie is because she did something really important. So the film was finished around 1988, and sometime in the 90s, like people keep on showing the film today, and I was getting really frustrated because so many Asian Americans were using this story as grievance, like, oh, look, people are assaulting us too. But the Vincent Chin campaign for justice was a campaign for justice. It was never about grievance. And I remember that, what was it, 2010, when Peter Leong?
2016.
16. Oh, okay. Peter Leong, who was a New York police cop in New York, shot into an empty stairwell and killed Akai Gurley. Like this, he and his girlfriend, the elevators were broken, so they just walked into the stairwell. He shot him, killed him, did not render aid. And then, so he's indicted for the killing. And then you've got like 10,000, mostly Chinese American or Chinese immigrants in Chinatown in New York, rallying to defend Peter Leong. And some people even invoke the name of Vincent Chin as if Peter Leong was Vincent Chin. And then Annie was, who grew up in Chinatown, wrote this piece in Medium, and you can talk about it. It was like just amazing. And I said, like, finally, somebody is really putting this case in perspective of, just not this fossil of something that happened in the 1980s that we just, pull out every year in June and say, which is what people do.
Right.
But, this is like, and then we can maybe later talk about how it relates to policing and, hate crime legislation, everything today. But so Annie, I mean, you have to talk about that Medium piece. It was just like blew my mind.
Please.
Thank you for that. I remembered when I saw the comments and I saw you comment on it, Renee. I was like, oh my God, Renee Tajima-Peña is on this. Oh my goodness. When Akai Gurley was killed, and it was not an intentional killing. I just want to make that clear. Like the bullet bounced off a wall and hit him straight in the heart. So I think there were particulars about the case that the Chinese American community in particular, because Peter Leong is Chinese, were taking offense at. And people were calling him a scapegoat for the crimes of the NYPD during the era of Black Lives Matter, which had just started 2 years prior in 2014, after the murders of Eric Garner and Michael Brown. And there just wasn't very nuanced language at that point around Black and Asian solidarities. I heard stories from the rally, which some of my family members actually attended, that, Akai Gurley's auntie was there and people were holding up middle fingers, and people were unsure what to make of what happened. And, other people were saying, Vincent Chin was murdered just like Peter Leong is being scapegoated. And I just saw that as a very false comparison, because I know that it was racial solidarities that made Vincent Chin's name known to everyone. I came across a photo recently of Jesse Jackson, who was running for president then, hugging my great auntie Lily Chin. And I know deep in my heart that racial solidarity was what got Vincent Chin's name known to people. And, I didn't want that to be forgotten. And so I wrote a Medium piece saying Vincent Chin has more in common with Akai Gurley. Again, not a perfect comparison at all, but that we have to stand together and talk about policing and talk about the fact that I, in a private apartment, don't have cops in my stairwell. And it shut down that conversation where people were using Vincent Chin's name in that way. I also have to say my family was very mad at me for writing that article, because they didn't want Vincent's name associated then with the Black Lives Matter movement, which I understand, like there's a lot of conversation that needs to happen, right? And in fact, that conversation was what brought me back home to New York City. I was living in Chicago at the time, and I realized that in order to like really organize and be an activist, and change the hearts and minds of people, you have to be with your people, and you have to believe in the possibility of change for everyone, not just a few people. And in fact, I have like a little nameplate my boyfriend made for me. It says, oh yeah, so it says, teaching is the greatest act of optimism. And if we're going to change the world, and if we're going to make movements happen, we have to really truly believe that our elders, our communities, like stand in solidarity with Black Lives Matter and other movements that are fighting for justice right now. I initially wrote that piece in anger, you know, mad at people who would invoke my cousin's name like that. And that was actually the first time I spoke up publicly about the Vincent Chin, my relationship with Vincent Chin, which has now, I guess, brought me here 5 years later in this very roundabout way. But I think I was just going to say, lastly, I think it's just very important to see the larger scope of things. And we can get so myopic, especially during pandemic times, about what we think is happening, and see a certain view. And we need to get beyond that and actually look at the histories of our peoples, and then make films about it that look at a larger view, going back to what you were talking about with the many, many layers in Who Killed Vincent Chin.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Please, Renee.
It's so funny that you said you wrote the piece in anger, because that's why I wanted to make Who Killed Vincent Chin, because it pissed me off so much. And Asian women's anger is pretty awesome. You know, like the Linda Lindas, that punk band.
The Linda Lindas,
Texas boy. Yeah. Or Mrs. She in San Francisco, who kicked that guy's ass and he went after her.
Of course.
Yeah. Sorry.
And I was just gonna say the kid who wrote the Racist Sexist Boy is a fifth grader, and I teach fifth graders, and so I showed my fifth grade students one of their songs, not Racist Sexist Boy, but it just goes to show you the youth are gonna change this world. Sorry, Yung.
No, not at all. This is fascinating, and this is so cool that we can bring you two together here to have this first face-to-face. I think, Renee, though, I want to pick on something you mentioned, which is the reason why you wanted to make Who Killed Vincent Chin, which was because you were angry and pissed off. So I think we're at a place here where we can look at a film like Who Killed Vincent Chin as an activist film, as a film that is intended to galvanize a community, a people, not just a community, but go beyond that. So can you tell me a little more about that experience? How conscious were you in the process in creating a film that could be a tool for change? And now, as you reflect back on it, how effective has that tool been?
I mean, completely. You know, I started as a student activist when I was like, I don't know, middle school. And, you know, I came up in the ranks of the Asian American student movement and the BIPOC. We didn't call ourselves BIPOC back then, but Black, Indigenous, People of Color movement. And so that's how I looked at it in a very as a political tool. I mean, as a filmmaker, social issue filmmaker, I don't think, you know, the films are not going to make change. It's people make change, and films are really a tool. And I think that that's what's important about what Annie and like a new generation of Asian Americans are really using the story in a different way. I mean, if you look at in the early 1980s, justice for Vincent Chin meant to all of us hate crime protection, which meant, you know, enhanced penalties, basically. And today, I think for a lot of particularly younger Asian Americans, that's not how they look at justice. That's not how they're looking at a solution. they're not looking at it as, more police on the streets and as, just enhanced penalties for people who commit hate crimes. I think for many reasons. One, it's very hard to prove a hate crime, and hate crimes are not like, everybody's running around with like a hood, like a Klan hood. Hate crimes, the hate is in your heart. And how do you prove that? I mean, that's one thing. So it's hard to prove. Actually, I've read that disproportionately hate crime laws have been used against people of color rather than white people lately. And the other thing is, I think the way Asian Americans, particularly young Asian Americans, look at their community. I mean, their community is not just, Chinatown, not just like the Asian American community. Their beloved community are these broader communities. I mean, we live in Black, Indigenous, POC communities. We live there. We're a part of those communities. And even if we're not, they are a part of our heart, our beloved community. So if we're bringing more policing into these communities, if we're just bringing, I mean, in New York, for example, there had been a lot of cases of hate, and even the New York police have been saying, well, it's the people, they don't say it this way, but the people who are the perpetrators are often, impacted by deep poverty, mental health issues that have never been addressed. And it's so, it's much more complicated than just, this is like a racial, I mean, there's so many things that go on in any kind of encounter between two people. I think that race can be the factor that turns a yellow light to a green light. And I think that's what happened in the Vincent Chin case. I think that's what happened in the Aaron Long case in Atlanta. But, it's much more complicated. So the solutions, can't just be like, well, let's just get more cops on the street. Let's arrest more people. Let's put them in jail for a longer time.
Yeah. And it seems also that, I mean, as you mentioned, I mean, I do see how, what happened to Vincent Chin, fast forward to today, and within the justice system and civil rights and all the problems inherent that are coming out today. I mean, the idea that a film that you made in 87, 88 is still so relevant, I think is a clear indication, that much work is required and much change is required, and that a film like yours, Renee, can instigate that kind of emotional reaction, which is, I think, the power of that cinema that you made. And I think, much as it was then, the fear of Japan, the invasion, the yellow fever, fast forward to today, that is the similarity we're seeing with China, for example, and things revolving around the pandemic and its relation to the rise in anti-Asian hate crimes. I think, we're kind of nearing the end of our Q&A, and I feel like we could just started opening the box here. We could just keep going. There's so much more I'd love to dive into, but just thinking in a way of bringing things to an end. I think that I'd love to hear from each of you a little bit. Firstly, Annie is an activist and an educator. If you could tell me a little bit about how, and I'm trying to keep it into the zone of a film like Vincent Chin, or films like this that have the ability to invoke a sense of need for change after seeing something play out, and in a way that, in 88 minutes or whatever we have in a film, to be able to really parse out the different layers and levels. Annie, how do you look towards documentary filmmaking and film as a way to invigorate your activism as an educator?
Yeah, so it's the first person accounts of what happened, right? There is no Vincent Chin case without Lily Chin.
Yeah.
No one would know Vincent Chin's, Vincent Chin's name without Lily. And it was her act of courage that brought this movement together, you know. And that's the same for Michael Brown's mother and Akai Gurley's auntie, and so many family members who have borne this legacy because they know the words are more powerful spoken from their mouths to keep telling the story of their relatives, which is why I have to keep telling my story, because I know it makes a difference when it comes out of my mouth. And I know when I'm teaching my students, and if I'm grounding things in an activist role, I must center the people most impacted, and share those voices, and then have my students like hear that. But it takes us admitting we don't know everything, that we're humble enough to seek out you know, answers and more questions like you did, Renee, in this film. And that, you know, we continue having these conversations, but also not ever bowing down to racism or anything that's just unacceptable.
And thank you. And Renee, you know, having made this film, I wonder if maybe you can speak on any words for the audience, some of whom may be filmmakers and activists or activist filmmakers, you know, how any words of wisdom you can impart to us having experienced your film, and what we can do to, from a filmmaker's point of view, activist filmmakers, social activist filmmakers, what can we do to keep moving forward and making positive change?
I mean, I think like one thing that's really changed, especially in the United States, is there's misinformation is like really toxic, and it's basically destroying the country. For example, and this is all within, you know, the realm of screens, we've been seeing these viral videos of Black and brown assailants, of Asian, particularly Asian elders. There's a new study from University of Michigan. They looked at, you know, anti-Asian hate, and they said it's like overwhelmingly white males. It's almost like 90%. But if you look at these viral videos, you would think, and it's fed into this idea of black and brown criminality and victimization of Asian Americans. And, you know, I think that one of our roles is not only to tell these stories, but to really push back, change the narrative. I mean, that's the project I'm working on now with Jeff Chang. It's called the hashtag May 19 project, Solidarity Is. And we're looking at this legacy of Asian American solidarity, particularly with other people of color. And today, and, you know, Annie talked about the role of mothers. Our video today, they're all only like 2 or 3 minutes. It's by Steve Meng, who made Crime and Punishment, and Joa Lee Grand, who's a Hmong filmmaker in Minneapolis. And it's about, and I'm going to mispronounce her name, but it's Yoa Vang Lee, who's a Hmong mother of Fong Lee, who was shot dead by Minneapolis police, you know, years ago. He was shot 3 times, and then when he fell, I think they shot him 5 more times, and he never saw justice. So last year in May, you know, about this time in May, when she saw that video of George Floyd and heard him call for his mother, and it just, you know, it was like a shot to the heart, because she thought, you know, that could be my child. And like Annie, with great criticism from her own community, because Officer Tao was, you know, there's a Hmong officer who was one of the 4 who's been indicted in the murder of George Floyd. And at great risk and, you know, with great criticism, she stood out. She went to a rally. She spoke in public about justice for George Floyd and the Black community. She remembered in Minneapolis when her son was killed, they were the first ones to come out in solidarity with her. And she said, you know, I'm going to come out in solidarity with them as well. So that the video, I mean, that story, and then, you know, Steve is like such a great filmmaker. So I hope everybody looks for it and, you know, posts it and watches it and shares it.
And we can find that again through the May 19th hashtag. Is that right? We could.
Yes. Yeah, it should be, you know,
Okay.
we have it on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.
Fantastic.
Not TikTok. Sorry.
And so,
and
you know,
been,
I can't, you know, I've definitely looked for that. And Steve is a fantastic filmmaker. And, you know, I guess I kind of have to wrap things up here, unfortunately. But firstly, from, you know, the link from Renee to Lily Chin, to Helen Zia, and to Annie Tan, you know, thank you for all the work you do. Thank you very much.
Thank
just
you.
put it in the chat. I put the website in the chat too.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, we'll make sure to link into that hashtag May 19th project, May 19 project, or seeusunite.org /unite. But again, thank you so much for this conversation, this discussion, and for the film that is so powerful. I think of that last image in the film, the close-up of Lily, so powerful, so wrenching, and so real. The power of cinema to move us is crucial. So thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you so much to Renee, to Annie, and for Yung for moderating this conversation. Thank you to Christopher and Emma from Toronto Sign Language Interpreter Service. Thank you to our technical team, Mimi Vong and Josephine Cruz. And thank you to you, the audience, for joining us. Real Asian is presenting our 25th festival this November, and I hope you'll join us then. So stay in touch with us at realasian.com. Take care and stay safe.